they have vowed to address the root causes of migration in Central America, acknowledging that the problem doesn't begin at the U.S.-Mexico border. They have undone some of the Trump administration's most anti-immigrant policies, from his travel ban on several Muslim-majority countries to the so-called Remain in Mexico policy that required asylum seekers to stay in Mexico while awaiting their immigration court dates in the U.S. And they have pushed legislation, albeit so far unsuccessfully, to legalize large swaths of the population of undocumented immigrants living in the U.S. and reinvent a broken immigration system. So that's all to the good. But there is mounting frustration among immigrant advocates that too little has changed well into Biden's first year in office. Okay, I won't editorialize on this yet, but I have words to say about this. We said it earlier, and I'll say it again. Anyway, the administration has clung to pandemic-related border restrictions implemented by the Trump administration last year, and Biden has persisted in telling migrants, don't come, even though many of them are fleeing unlivable conditions ranging from gang violence to climate-related devastation. The latest blows have been the administration's recent announcements that it will resume rapid deportation of families at the U.S.-Mexico border and that it intends to indefinitely, I don't know why I thought that was identified, that it intends to indefinitely maintain the pandemic-related border restrictions under Title 42, a section of the Public Health Service Act that allows the U.S. government to temporarily block non-citizens from entering the U.S. when doing so is required in the interest of public health. Some advocates are now finding themselves in a more adversarial position than they had hoped to be. The American Civil Liberties Union has been in closed-door negotiations with the Biden administration for months over Title 42, temporarily putting its lawsuit challenging the policy in federal court on hold. While it has secured the entry of thousands of vulnerable migrants to the U.S. as a result of those negotiations, the ACLU announced Monday that they had reached an impasse and that the lawsuit seeking to end the policy would continue. It was a signal that, to whatever extent advocates had given the Biden administration a grace period on immigration, it might be coming to an end. The Biden administration is not the Trump administration, said Lee Gallant, the lead attorney on the ACLU case. It would be wrong to say that the Biden administration has been equally bad, but ultimately, because Title 42 has not been repealed, it means that families and other asylum seekers are still being expelled. And so the danger is that whatever good the Biden administration has done, it is overshadowed by all the harm being done by Title 42. The U.S. continues to turn away the majority of migrants arriving at the southern border under Title 42, though there are exceptions for unaccompanied minors, some families from Central America with young children, and people who were sent back to Mexico to wait for their court hearings in the U.S. The policy, implemented by then-President Donald Trump in March 2020, has allowed U.S. immigration officials at the southern border to rapidly expel nearly 1 million migrants since the onset of the pandemic. Though scientists at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, opposed the policy initially, arguing there was no legitimate public health rationale behind it, then Vice President Mike Pence ordered the agency to follow through with it anyway. Immigrant advocates and humanitarian groups say that the policy prevents migrants from exercising their right under U.S. and international law to seek asylum. What's more, public health experts have repeatedly said that migrants can be processed and admitted to the U.S. safely. Indeed, this is already occurring on a small scale, as some migrants are being tested for COVID-19 with private funds before being allowed to cross the border. We are not cavalier about COVID or the new variants, Gallant said, but it does not mean that with all the U.S. government's resources, it cannot safely process asylum seekers, as public health officials have been saying consistently for months. We allow many people to cross the border every day, but we are telling asylum seekers they cannot cross, even with precautions. Yet the CDC nevertheless issued an updated order on Monday saying that the policy would remain in effect until the agency's director determines that migrants no longer pose a serious danger to the public health in terms of spreading COVID-19. Officials at the Department of Homeland Security, meanwhile, have continued to insist that they are merely deferring to public health experts at the CDC in opting to continue enforcing the policy. Title 42 is not an immigration authority, but a public health authority, and its continued use is dictated by CDC and governed by the CDC's analysis of public health factors, DHS said in a statement Monday. But keeping the order in place has serious humanitarian consequences for migrants trapped in Mexico. As of June 2021, the advocacy group Human Rights First has tracked over 3,250 cases of asylum seekers and migrants kidnapped, raped, or attacked after being blocked or expelled to Mexico since Biden took office. The Biden administration's decision also plays into a damaging right-wing portrayal of migrants as carriers of disease. Yes, that is true. A recent Axios poll found that nearly 37% of unvaccinated Americans blame foreign travelers in the U.S. for the rise in COVID-19 cases. Oh, God. Okay. But data hadn't previously shown migrants on the border to be any more likely to test positive for COVID-19. In March, the acting head of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, told Congress that less than 6% of migrants at the border had tested positive for COVID-19, a lower percentage than the Texas positivity rate at the time. The Biden administration and the CDC should be standing up for the truth, not helping to fuel that false, dangerous, and racist narrative. Eleanor Asser, Human Rights First's Senior Director for Refugee Protection, said in a statement. Yeah. Okay. In addition to keeping Title 42 in place, the Biden administration also announced last week that it was reviving the use of what's called expedited removal against certain Central American families who recently arrived at the southern border, cannot be expelled under Title 42, and do not have a legal basis to stay in the United States. Affected families can now be returned to their home countries in a matter of weeks, rather than the typical years it can take to resolve a full deportation case, and they don't get a hearing before an immigration judge or the opportunity to consult a lawyer. In a statement on Friday, DHS defended the decision to use expedited removal against families as a means to securely manage our border and as a step toward our broader aim to realize safe and orderly immigration processing. By placing into expedited removal families who cannot be expelled under Title 42, we are making clear that those who do not qualify to remain in the United States will be promptly removed, it said. But most immigration attorneys say expedited removal doesn't give migrants the chance to fully articulate why they might be entitled to humanitarian protection, leading them to be unfairly turned away, sent back to danger in their home countries, and barred from re-entering the U.S. for 5 years or more. Here's how it works. When a migrant shows up at the border without papers, a U.S. Customs and Border Protection officer will screen them to determine whether they might be eligible for humanitarian protection. They are looking for two things. One, whether a migrant expresses an intention to apply for asylum, or two, whether they fear potential persecution or torture if they return to their home country. Excuse me, my throat is starting to go out on me, as it always does. If they meet either of these criteria, then the migrant will be referred to an asylum officer for another interview before they are allowed to present their case in immigration court. They will be informed about their rights and what the process entails, and are typically given time to retain a lawyer and prepare their case, which includes gathering documents attesting to experiences that might make them eligible to remain in the U.S. An immigration judge will ultimately decide their fate, often years later. But If a migrant doesn't pass that initial screening by CBP, they will be detained and rapidly deported under expedited removal without any recourse. That means if CBP fails to identify every migrant who might be eligible for humanitarian protection, some are bound to fall through the cracks and wrongfully be sent back home. Anytime you are imposing an expedited process, you run the risk that people's due process rights will be infringed upon, said Nicole Ramos, who works with asylum seekers in Tijuana, Mexico, as part of the legal aid group Al Otro Lado's Border Rights Project. Biden's border policies have led at times to strained relations with the immigrant advocacy community. Gellert said that the ACLU has had a constructive relationship with the Biden administration in reuniting migrant families who were separated by the Trump administration and in ending the Remain in Mexico policy, among other issues. But on Title 42, they have clashed. I'm not going to say that it's completely adversarial, he said. I believe that the Biden administration is acting in good faith, but we don't see eye to eye on them with all issues, and it will be adversarial on certain issues. But others in the advocacy community feel that Biden has outright failed them. Ramos, for example, says she hasn't seen any meaningful shift in rhetoric. Maybe Joe Biden is not saying that Mexicans are drug dealers and rapists, she said, but the primary message to all migrants who are fleeing for their lives are fleeing because of economic conditions that we largely created to make their homes uninhabitable is, don't come. What's more, she says that the administration dragged their feet on helping separated families return to the U.S., even though her organization had been asking the administration to allow them to enter the U.S. immediately after Biden was inaugurated. Those families were ready to come into the U.S. on day one, including someone who was hiding in Mexico in active danger and another woman that had not seen her child in 3 years, Ramos said. The news on Title 42 and expedited removal are their latest disappointments, but Ramos said she never expected the Biden administration to be a partner to organizations like hers. I never believed the Biden administration on the campaign trail to begin with, though some of my colleagues did, she said. I think the Biden administration is a continuation of the Trump administration, is a continuation of the Obama administration. The only thing that changes on the Titanic is they're just moving the chairs around on the deck. The whole system is based on white supremacy. Just tell us what you really mean. Yeah, so that's some harsh words there. Okay. Yeah, there's another one. Pressure is building on Biden to do more for asylum seekers and migrants. President Biden is in a tough place on immigration. On one side, he faces growing pressure from supporters who want his administration to stop turning away asylum seekers and to invest more political capital on creating a pathway to citizenship for the nation's 11 million undocumented immigrants. On the other side, critics want him to do more to stop what has turned into the largest wave of migrants arriving at the U.S. southern border in recent history, with border agents averaging 6,300 encounters with migrants every day last month. It's against this backdrop that Biden spoke Monday to the nation's largest Latino advocacy organization, Unidos US. In pre-recorded remarks, Biden promised to continue to fight for undocumented Americans. My administration will always have your back, he declared. Some Biden supporters, like Ali Noorani of the National Immigration Forum, hoped his speech would not be directed at not just his base, but more broadly to the American people, particularly to swing voters who are concerned about migration yet recognize the value of immigrants in their communities. This has to be a speech to suburban families, to rural families who are asking questions of, okay, as a nation, are we going to be safe and secure under the Biden administration? Noorani said. And are we going to be able to treat the immigrants who I've come to know and love through church, through work, through school? Are we going to treat them compassionately? Noorani said Biden needs the backing of a much broader swath of Americans if he wants to build the support he needs to address immigration issues. In his less than 2-minute remark, less than 2-minute remarks, Biden did not address border security. He instead spoke about protecting vulnerable immigrants brought to the country illegally as children, as well as fighting for a pathway to citizenship for much of the larger community of 11 million undocumented immigrants. He also thanked advocates affiliated with Unidos US, as well as the broader Latino community, for stepping up during their pandemic to help Americans get through the health crisis. 6 months ago, our nation was reeling from a once-in-a-century health crisis, a once-in-a-generation economic crisis, both of which brought disproportionate heartache to Latino families, Biden said. Since taking office, Biden has followed through on several campaign promises, including stopping construction of the southern border wall. He ended a Trump administration program that required asylum seekers to remain in Mexico as they waited for their cases to be heard. And he created a task force to reunite immigrant children and parents who were separated at the U.S.-Mexico border. But legislation to create a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million undocumented immigrants has gone almost nowhere. Smaller legislative packages that would protect farm workers and younger immigrants brought to the country illegally as children have also stalled. Finding a way to protect those younger immigrants has become even more important to Biden's supporters after a federal judge in Texas ruled this month that the program created to protect them was unconstitutional. The administration has vowed to appeal the decision and also supports efforts by Democratic lawmakers to try to fold the issue into a massive budget reconciliation package this summer. In the past week, however, Biden has twice questioned whether the Senate rules would allow such a move. In Monday's remarks, Biden did not address the fate of a Trump-era pandemic rule that has been kept in place, allowing his administration to quickly turn away tens of thousands of people seeking asylum. That rule, known as Title 42, has angered some supporters who see it less as a public health measure and more of a convenient way to deter migration and keep political opponents at bay. One of the most damaging legacies from the Trump administration is the goalposts were moved in such a way that we further limited the rights of asylum seekers and migrants at the border, says Dylan Corbett, executive director of the Hope Border Institute. And if we don't have the political courage to at least restore the modicum of rights that asylum seekers have at the border, the moving of those goalposts and the eroding of those rights will be the new normal, he said. Those attending the virtual conference were, of course, also interested in what Biden had to say about pandemic relief. The pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on Latino families, said Clarissa Martinez de Castro, Deputy Vice President of Policy and Advocacy at Unidos US. While immigration packs a powerful punch, and it is incredibly important for Latinos who care deeply about the economy and jobs, Martinez said, we care deeply about how we're going to recover from the pandemic and about health care, particularly the cost of health care, and all of those things are interconnected, and they also intersect with the most vulnerable among us, who are immigrants and the undocumented. There are obvious political reasons to address the fastest growing population in the country. Matt Barreto, a Democratic pollster who advised the Biden campaign, said political parties need to engage with the communities well ahead of elections, noting the large number of first-time voters who are Latino. Because of that churn of new citizens and young people, we can't take the Latino vote for granted, he said. Well, sorry, repositioning myself here. That's some really good points being made there. I have defended the Biden administration so far because I knew that the expectations were going to be way up here and that the ability of what Democrats could do on their own without some sort of Republican help was going to be way down here, and that meant getting to even a middle ground was going to be really hard. And so I don't think, on one hand, that it's reasonable to expect Biden to make some of the changes that people have been expecting him to make. However, having said that, this stuff at the border is not rocket science, really. It's like, hey, do we honor our commitments to migrants, to refugees, or don't we? It's as simple as that. And so, yeah, I'm leaning towards the critical side here, I have to admit. I just don't think, I mean, they're in a tough place. I'll put it this way. I would not like to have that job. I would not like to be in charge of U.S. immigration policy, because you're just going to get creamed by everybody on all different sides, no matter what you try to do. But even so, I think they could be doing better. So there we go. I've said it, and I've said it. So anyway, here's a really short piece, but I wanted to bring this out because this is a positive note here. This is entitled, Illinois Governor Signs Bills Effectively Ending Statewide Immigration Detention. I don't know if you've heard this yet or not, but here you go. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker signed 4 new bills into law on Monday that in effect end immigration detention by expanding protections for immigrants and refugees. In an attempt to establish Illinois as the most welcoming state in the nation, he also issued an executive order creating the Welcoming Illinois Office. In an official press release, the governor's office said, quote, the new laws strengthen the Illinois Trust Act and make Illinois the second state in the nation to require local officials to end partnerships with ICE, address hate crimes against immigrant communities, expand workplace protection for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, recipients, and create the Illinois Immigration Impact Task Force to ensure state programs and policies best serve immigrant residents. The first bill, HB 121, amends the Illinois Human Rights Act to broaden protections for DACA recipients by preventing discrimination based on the specific status or term of status that accompanies a legal work authorization. The second bill, SB 667, establishes the Illinois Way Forward Act and amends the Illinois Trust Act by restricting law enforcement officials' power to inquire about a person's immigration status and by granting the Attorney General enforcement powers. The third bill, SB 1596, amends the Illinois 2012 Criminal Code definition of a hate crime to include the commission of the specified criminal acts against a person because of the actual or perceived citizenship or immigration status of the person. Final bill, SB 2665, establishes the Illinois Immigrant Impact Task Force, which will examine immigrant community-related issues and make recommendations by May 31st, 2022. Governor J.B. Pritzker, who announced last month that he is running for re-election, said, throughout my governorship, I've directed my administration to adopt policies that make Illinois a welcoming state for immigrants, and I'm proud to sign these accountability measures into law to advance our cause. He also shared a message saying families belong together here in Illinois, always. So, yeah, some good news. It's not all bad. Okay, let me see if I can squeeze in one more article here. Let's try and see what's the shortest. I'll try this one. Okay. This is from Harvard Business Review. Research. Why immigrants are more likely to become entrepreneurs. We've already gone over this before, but we'll go over it again because I think it's important. If you're lucky enough to have received a COVID-19 vaccination, you probably have an immigrant entrepreneur to thank. Not only are Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna pioneers in the field of mRNA-based vaccine research, they were all founded or co-founded by immigrants. The entrepreneurs who started those companies are prominent examples of a larger trend. Elmer Fudd here. Awaja Twend. A 2012 study found that immigrants were more likely to start businesses than members of the native population in most of the 69 countries surveyed. In the United States, where 13.7% of the population is foreign-born, immigrants represent 20.2% of the self-employed workforce and 25% of startup founders. Sorry, my throat's going out on me again. And according to a 2018 study by the National Foundation for American Policy, immigrants founded or co-founded 55% of the United States billion-dollar companies, so-called unicorns. 55%, that's over half. Yet we have a limited understanding of why so many immigrants take the risk of starting a company. Previous research has attributed the phenomenon to host country effects, such as labor market discrimination, selective immigration policies, and the availability of specific opportunities within ethnic groups in areas with high overall immigration. In my recent research, my meaning the author, I explored a more hidden driver of immigrant entrepreneurship, personality-based self-selection. The decisions to emigrate voluntarily and to start a company are both associated with high levels of risk. Entrepreneurs of all types face the threat of business failure. As a study of startups in several OECD countries showed, just above 60% survive past their third birthday, and only 40% make it past their seventh one. Immigrants to encounter significant additional risks, from unemployment or underemployment to xenophobia and psychological trauma. My hypothesis was that people with a high tolerance for risk would be more likely than others to perceive both voluntary immigration and entrepreneurship as viable paths. So I expected that immigrants would be more likely than others to start businesses precisely because of their appetite for risk, which helped them go abroad in the first place. I tested the hypothesis. Really? Let me try that again. I tested the hypothesis through a longitudinal study of engineering and business students at 2 Austrian universities. God, I can't talk today. In 2007, I surveyed 1,300 students about their risk-taking preferences and their intentions and concrete plans to start a business and move abroad for work. 12 years later, I collected a second wave of data from 360 of them via 2 professional social media platforms to learn about their careers since the first survey was conducted. The results confirmed my hypothesis. Students with a high willingness to take risks were significantly more likely than others to plan to emigrate and start a business, and by 2019, those plans had become reality. More than a quarter of the former students had moved abroad, and many had become entrepreneurs. While 19% of the non-immigrants in the sample had started 1 or more companies, 29% of those who had emigrated and still lived abroad had done so. Among those who had emigrated but subsequently returned to Austria, the figure was even higher. 43% had started a business in the 12 years covered by the study. Anyway, I have to end it here because I have run out of time. I'm sorry for all the fumbling. I suppose if I went back and redid some of this stuff, I could shorten it and get more in, but I'm not going to do that because my throat's getting tired and you're getting tired of listening to me. So thank you for joining us today. We hope you'll join us again soon. And in the meantime, have a great week. Bye-bye.